On February 15, 1820, in the town of Adams, Massachusetts, a legend was born. Her name was Susan Burnell Anthony. Susan grew up in a family of 9 people, including her 2 parents, Lucy and Daniel, her siblings, and Susan herself.
When Susan was growing up, she belonged to the Quaker church called the Society of Friends. The Quakers believed that men and women were created equal. They also believed that men and women should have the same learning rights. Because of this, her grandmother was able to teach her how to read.
Susan had many different occupations in her life. Some of the jobs that Susan had were a tutor, teacher, public speaker, and author. As a tutor, she worked for a family in Easton, Massachusetts. She worked as a teacher for more than 10 years. Most of Susan's life she spent as a public speaker. During her public speaking life, she wrote a few books, including her own newspaper, The Revolution.
One of Susan's fellow fighters was Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was born November 12, 1815 in Johnstown, New York. Elizabeth grew up in a family of 12 people, which included her parents, Daniel and Margaret, her 9 siblings, and of course, Elizabeth.
When Elizabeth was growing up, her brother Eleazar became ill and died. The result of him dying was Elizabeth tried to be more manly. To do this, she learned how to ride horses, and she was the only girl in her class learning how to speak Greek. She also debated with her fellow male students. One university that Elizabeth wanted to attend was Union College, but they did not believe in co-education.
Amelia Bloomer introduced Susan to Elizabeth. They quickly became friends and started working on the fight for women's suffrage. They did many things together to help women's suffrage. Some of the things they did were wrote books and gave speeches.
One of the big events was the Seneca Falls Convention. It took place in 1848. At the convention, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was pronounced the founder and first president of the Women's Suffrage Association.
There were many reasons why they fought for women's rights. One reason is that they felt their husbands had too much control over what they did. One example of this is when a woman gets married, everything she has was her husband's, and he could do whatever he wanted with it. Another example of this is the only way a woman could divorce a man is when the man would commit adultery.
In 1895, Elizabeth Cady Stanton published a book called The Women's Bible. This book talks about how the Bible treated women. Then in 1898, the Women's Bible was reprinted.
There were 2 main groups during the women's suffrage. They were the National Women's Suffrage Association and the American Women's Suffrage Association. The American Women's Suffrage Association was created by Lucy Stone, Henry B. Blackwell, Julia Ward Howe, and T.W. Higginson. These 2 groups reunited after 21 years and became the National American Women's Suffrage Association.
During the Civil War, the fight for women's suffrage was put aside. Susan B. Anthony did not want this to happen. She didn't want this to happen because she was afraid she would lose momentum. She also was afraid she would lose supporters.
The 14th and 15th Amendment gave men more rights than women. This inspired the women to work harder for their rights. The 14th and 15th Amendment allowed all men to vote. When women tried to vote, the ballots were not counted.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton played an important role in the women's suffrage. She was the president of the National Women's Suffrage Association for 20 years. Elizabeth retired in 1892. She died on Sunday, October 26, 1902.
Susan Burnell Anthony also played an important role in the fight for women's suffrage. She helped the fight for women's suffrage greatly by being persistent in what she believed in and never giving up on her dream. Susan retired from her duties in 1872. She died on Tuesday, March 13, 1906.
On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment became a law. The 19th Amendment allows women to vote. It is also called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. On November 2, 1920, millions of women went to the polls and voted for the first time. Approximately 80 years later, George W. Bush declared August 26 to be Women's Equality Day.
The women's suffrage and this year's National History Day theme of exploration, encounter, and exchange have a great deal in common. During the women's suffrage, women explored the country talking about their ideas. They also explored how far they could go and do things people didn't like, such as voting without breaking the law.
There were many things women encountered during the women's suffrage. One thing they encountered many times was the law. One example of this is when Susan B. Anthony, her sister, and 11 other people were arrested for voting. They also encountered people who supported their ideas and people who didn't.
One of the many things that women exchanged during the women's suffrage was support for each other. They also exchanged their ideas with many people, although not everyone agreed with them.
Many women worked for decades to earn the right to vote. Now we are benefiting from their activities. Women, we have come a long way.